At my son's wedding, my wife quietly said, "Just pretend you know nothing." I had spent months imagining my son Robert Dolan's wedding, but nothing could have prepared me for those 8 words from my wife. I remember standing near the entrance of the wedding hall, watching guests arrive, listening to the soft music, and feeling proud that the little boy I once carried on my shoulders was now standing in a perfectly fitted suit, ready to begin his own life. His sister Millie was helping with the final preparations, and Dinah, my wife, looked unusually nervous. I assumed it was the normal stress of a wedding. Then she came close to me, held my arm, and whispered, "Daniel, just pretend you know nothing." I looked at her. Know nothing about what? She immediately looked toward Robert. He was talking to his bride and smiling, completely unaware of what had just happened. I asked Dana again, but she shook her head. "Not here, please." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. After 30 years of marriage, I knew when Dinah was hiding something. She wasn't simply nervous, she was frightened. I followed her toward a quiet hallway and asked what was happening. She told me that there was something about Robert's wedding that I was not supposed to know. I asked whether Robert was in trouble. She said no. I asked whether his bride had changed her mind. Again, no. Then I asked the question that made her eyes fill with tears. "Is someone trying to hurt my son?" Dana immediately said, "No, Daniel, nothing like that. But you have to trust me." Trust her? I had trusted Dana for decades, but at that moment, trust was exactly what was being tested. I looked back toward the wedding hall. Robert was laughing with his friends. Millie was fixing something near the stage. Everyone looked happy. Yet my wife had just told me to pretend I knew nothing. I asked her what would happen if I refused. She whispered, "You could ruin everything." Those words stopped me. I had spent my entire life protecting my children. I couldn't imagine standing still if something threatened their future. But Dana took my hand and said, "Please, Daniel, just get through the ceremony. Afterward, I'll tell you everything." I agreed, but only because I had no better choice. I walked back into the hall and forced myself to smile. The ceremony began. Robert stood beside his bride, and I watched him make promises about honesty, loyalty, and family. Every word felt different after what Dana had told me. Then, just before the vows ended, I noticed a man standing near the back of the room. I had never seen him before. But the moment he looked at me, he immediately turned away. Dana saw him too. Her face went pale. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Daniel, don't look at him." That was when I realized my wife's secret was much bigger than I had imagined. I tried to focus on the ceremony, but my attention kept returning to the stranger at the back of the hall. He stood alone. He stood alone, dressed formally, with an expression that made him look completely out of place among the smiling relatives and friends. I asked Dana who he was. She refused to answer. "Not now," she whispered. I watched the man leave the room just before the final photographs. I wanted to follow him, but Dana held my arm. "Please, Daniel," I stayed. When the ceremony ended, everyone moved toward the reception area. Robert hugged me and said, "Dad, I can't believe the day is finally here." I smiled and told him how proud I was. I wanted to ask him about the stranger, but I remembered Dana's warning. During the reception, I noticed Millie speaking quietly with Dana. Millie looked worried. When she saw me watching, she quickly changed the subject. That confirmed something was happening among the people closest to me. I waited until Robert was busy greeting guests. Then I found Dana in a side room. "Enough," I said. "You promised you would tell me after the ceremony." She closed the door and took a deep breath. "The man you saw is named Victor." I immediately recognized the name. Victor had once been connected to a business dispute involving me years ago. I had not seen him in a long time. I asked why he was at Robert's wedding. Dana said he contacted me several months ago. I asked what he wanted. She explained that Victor claimed to have information about Robert's bride and her family. According to him, there was an old financial matter that could affect Robert's future. I asked why she had kept it from me. She said Victor had threatened to reveal embarrassing information during the wedding if we didn't cooperate. I was furious. "Why didn't you tell me?" Dana replied, "Because I knew you would confront him." She was right. I would have. I told her that keeping something this serious from me was dangerous. She started crying and said she was trying to protect Robert's wedding. Then Millie entered the room. She looked at both of us and said, "Dad, Mom didn't tell you because she was afraid." I asked what she knew. Millie hesitated. Then she handed me a small envelope. "Robert doesn't know about this." Inside was an old photograph of Victor standing beside a man I recognized immediately. It was Thomas, someone who had been involved in the collapse of my old business. I looked at Millie. Why are they together? She said, that's what I've been trying to find out. I realized the wedding was not simply about Robert and his bride. Someone had brought the past into our family's happiest day. I asked Millie whether Robert's bride knew anything. She said she wasn't sure. Then Dinah said something that made everything more confusing. Daniel, Victor says Robert's bride's father knows exactly what happened years ago. I felt my anger rising. But before I could respond, Robert knocked on the door. Dad, Mom, why are you hiding in here? We quickly put the photograph away. Robert walked in, smiling, completely unaware of the secret surrounding him. I looked at my son and realized I had only two choices. Tell him everything and risk destroying his wedding, or stay silent long enough to understand the truth. I chose silence, but I had no idea that someone else had already decided to speak. Robert entered the room and looked at each of us. Is everything okay? I forced a smile and said, of course. Your mother was just feeling overwhelmed. Dana nodded quickly. Robert hugged her and told her not to worry. Watching him made my decision harder. He was happy. I didn't want to destroy that happiness based on accusations from Victor. I asked him where his bride was. He said she was taking photographs with her family. Then he smiled and said, Dad, I need you to do something for me. I asked what? When I give my speech, I want you and Mom sitting in the front. I promised I would be there. As he left, I looked at Dana. I'm doing this for him. But after tonight, I want every answer. She nodded. Millie stayed behind. She told me she had been investigating Victor because she had discovered an old connection between him and Robert's bride's family. She had found records suggesting that Victor and Thomas had worked together years ago. Their involvement had caused problems for my business, although I had never been able to prove it. Millie suspected they were trying to use Robert's wedding to settle an old dispute. I asked whether Robert's bride was involved. Millie shook her head. I don't think so. That was important. I did not want to blame an innocent person for the actions of others. We decided to gather facts before confronting anyone. Later, during the reception, Robert gave his speech. He talked about family, trust, and second chances. I listened carefully. Then his bride spoke about how grateful she was to have joined our family. Dana looked at me with tears in her eyes. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then the light suddenly dimmed. A microphone near the stage came on. Victor stepped forward. He said he had something important to say. The room became silent. I immediately stood up, but Dana grabbed my arm. Remember what I told you? Victor began talking about the past. He claimed that my old business had caused financial problems for several people, including his family. He suggested that Robert's marriage was built on secrets. Guests started whispering. Robert looked confused. His bride looked shocked. I knew Victor was trying to create chaos. I stood up and calmly asked him to stop. He looked directly at me and smiled. Daniel, you still don't understand. I'm not here to destroy your son's wedding. I'm here because your family has been hiding the truth. I asked him to provide evidence. He pulled out several documents. Before he could continue, Millie walked onto the stage. She took the microphone and said, If you want to talk about the truth, then show them everything. Victor froze. Millie had copies of her own documents. She told everyone that the papers Victor had brought were incomplete. She had discovered original records that contradicted his claims. Robert looked at his sister in disbelief. Millie, what is going on? She looked at him and said, I'm sorry, Robert. We were trying to protect your wedding. Victor became angry and demanded that she stop. But Millie continued. She said the real story involved a financial agreement made years earlier. And then she revealed something none of us expected. Robert's bride's father had actually been trying to protect our family. The room went completely quiet after Millie said those words. Robert turned toward his bride, clearly confused. Her father stood near the front and slowly walked toward us. His name was David. He looked at me and said, Daniel, I wanted to explain this before today, but I was afraid it would affect the wedding. I asked him what he knew. David explained that years earlier, he had worked with Thomas and Victor on a business project connected to my company. He had discovered that money was being moved through several accounts without my knowledge. When he tried to question it, he was told to stay quiet. He eventually left the project, but he kept copies of the records. He had never contacted me because he believed I had chosen to move on. I asked why Victor was now attacking my family. David said Victor had recently learned that the old records could expose him and Thomas. He wanted to make sure those records disappeared. Robert finally spoke. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I stepped toward him. "Because we were trying to protect you." Robert shook his head. "Dad, you taught me that families should tell each other the truth." I knew he was right. Our silence had been intended to protect him, but it had also made him feel excluded. I apologized. Dana did too. Robert's bride stood beside him and said she had known that her father had concerns about Victor, but she had never understood how serious they were. She looked at Robert and said, "I'm sorry you were pulled into this." Robert took her hand. "None of this is your fault." That moment changed the atmosphere in the room. Victor tried to interrupt, but David produced original documents that showed the claims against me were misleading. Millie also provided copies of messages between Victor and Thomas. The evidence showed that they had planned to create confusion around the wedding and pressure our family into giving up the old records. Victor eventually left the reception. No one chased him. No one shouted at him. The celebration slowly returned to normal, although everyone knew the evening had changed. Robert asked me to step outside. He said, "Dad, I'm angry that you didn't trust me enough to tell me." I admitted that I had been afraid of ruining his day. He replied, "You almost did by keeping me in the dark." His words hurt, but I knew he was right. We talked for a long time. He told me that marriage was about honesty, and he didn't want his own marriage to begin with secrets. I told him that I had learned a painful lesson. Protecting someone does not always mean hiding the truth from them. Sometimes it means trusting them enough to face the truth together. When we returned inside, Robert went to his bride and asked her to dance. The music started again. Dana came beside me and whispered, "I'm sorry." I looked at her. "I know." She smiled through tears. But just when I thought the worst was over, Millie approached me. She had one final document in her hand. "Dad," she said, "there's something else you need to see." I opened it and realized the story was not finished. The document was an old agreement, bearing my signature, but I immediately knew something was wrong. The signature looked similar to mine, yet the date was impossible. I had been out of the country on that date. Millie explained that she had found the document in an archive connected to Thomas. It appeared someone had used my name without permission. David confirmed that he had seen a similar document years earlier. Robert joined us and asked what it meant. I told him it meant someone had been trying to create a false record that could make me responsible for financial decisions I had never made. Robert looked toward Victor's empty seat. "So this has been going on for years?" I nodded. Millie said, "That's why Mom told you to pretend you knew nothing. She was afraid that if Victor realized you knew about the documents, he would destroy the remaining evidence." I looked at Dana. She admitted that Victor had warned her that if she told me, he would release the accusations publicly during the wedding. She had believed keeping quiet was the only way to protect Robert. I told her I understood why she had been afraid, but I wished she had trusted me sooner. Dana apologized. We agreed that our family needed to handle the remaining matter together. The wedding continued, but the mood was different. Robert and his bride still danced, still cut the cake, and still took photographs with their families. Yet beneath the celebration, we knew something important had been uncovered. After the guests left, we met with David, Millie, and Robert in a quiet room. We decided to preserve every document and take them to the appropriate professionals. No one wanted revenge. We wanted the truth established properly. Over the following weeks, the investigation revealed that several old financial records had been manipulated. Thomas admitted to participating in the scheme, while Victor continued to deny responsibility. Eventually, the evidence became too strong to ignore. The matter was handled through the proper legal process. I received official confirmation that several accusations against me were false. My old business reputation was finally restored. But the experience changed me more than any financial recovery could. I realized how easily fear can make people hide information from the people they love. Dana had wanted to protect Robert. Millie had wanted to protect me. I had wanted to protect Robert's wedding. Everyone had good intentions, but our silence had nearly created the exact disaster we were trying to prevent. Robert understood that too. A few weeks after the wedding, he invited us to dinner. He said, "I want my marriage to start differently." He asked everyone to speak openly about what happened. Dana apologized again. Millie apologized for investigating alone. I apologized for not asking more questions. Robert said, "Maybe this is what family is supposed to be. Not people who never make mistakes, but people who can admit them." His words stayed with me. The wedding day had begun with a secret and ended with a lesson. We had learned that honesty does not always prevent pain, but it prevents people from facing pain alone. Months later, Robert and his wife visited us. Dana prepared dinner, and we all laughed about the wedding chaos. Then Robert looked at me and said, "Dad, remember when Mom told you to pretend you knew nothing?" I laughed. "How could I forget?" He smiled. "Well, now you know everything." I thought he was joking. Then he handed me an envelope. Not quite. I opened the envelope and found a photograph from the wedding. It showed all of us standing together before the ceremony. On the back, Robert had written a message. The day started with secrets, but it ended with our family choosing the truth. I looked at him and smiled. He told me that he and his wife had decided to keep the photograph as a reminder of their first day together. I told him that was a good idea. Dana sat beside me and said, "I wish I could erase the fear I felt that day." I told her we couldn't erase it, but we could learn from it. The months that followed were peaceful. The old business dispute was finally behind us. Victor and Thomas were no longer part of our lives. I stopped thinking about what they had done. For me, the real victory was seeing Robert happy in his marriage. Millie became more open with us too. She had always been independent, but after the wedding, she began telling us when she was worried about something instead of trying to solve everything alone. I encouraged her to keep that habit. Dana and I also changed the way we communicated. We started having regular family dinners where everyone could speak freely. Sometimes the conversations were serious. Sometimes they were completely ordinary. But we made sure no one felt they had to carry a problem alone. One evening, Robert asked me whether I regretted what happened at his wedding. I thought about it. "I regret that you had to experience it," I said. "But I don't regret that the truth came out." He nodded. "Neither do I." He told me that his wife had been worried that the incident would become the story of their marriage. Instead, they chose to let it become a lesson about trust. That made me proud. A wedding is supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter. Ours began with an unexpected interruption, but perhaps that made the meaning of the day even stronger. Robert learned that marriage requires honesty. Dana learned that protecting someone does not always mean hiding things from them. Millie learned that she didn't have to carry every family problem alone. And I learned that sometimes the strongest thing a father can do is trust his children with the truth. A year after the wedding, Robert and his wife renewed their vows privately. They invited only close family. Before the ceremony began, Robert came to me and said, "Dad, this time there are no secrets." I smiled. "Good." He laughed. "Mom promised." Dana shook her head. I learned my lesson. We all laughed. During the vows, Robert spoke about trust. He said marriage wasn't about having a perfect life. It was about facing difficult moments together. I looked at Dana and remembered her whisper at the original wedding. "Just pretend you know nothing." I never expected those words to become one of the most important lessons of our family's life. After the ceremony, Robert hugged me. "Thank you for staying calm that day." I told him I wasn't calm. He laughed. "You looked calm." I replied, "Your mother was holding my arm so tightly I couldn't move." Everyone laughed. It was a small joke, but it reminded me how different things felt now. There was no fear in the room. No hidden documents. No strangers waiting to create confusion. Just family. Yet before the evening ended, Dana pulled me aside and said, "Daniel, I want to tell you something I should have told you on that wedding day." I looked at Dana and asked, "What is it?" She smiled and said, "I was terrified that telling you the truth would destroy our family, but hiding it almost did." I nodded because I knew exactly what she meant. The wedding had taught all of us something we would never forget. Secrets may sometimes feel like protection, but they can become walls between people. The truth may be uncomfortable, but it gives a family a chance to stand together. I told Dana that I had forgiven her. She said she knew, but she still wished she had trusted me sooner. I told her that I also had something to apologize for. I had spent years believing that protecting my children meant solving their problems before they knew about them. But Robert and Millie were adults. They deserved to be treated as partners in the family, not children who needed every difficult truth hidden from them. Dana agreed. From that day forward, our family became more open. If something worried us, we talked about it. If someone had a problem, we listened before offering advice. If there was a disagreement, we tried to solve it without turning it into a battle. Looking back, I realized that the most important thing that happened at Robert's wedding was not the confrontation with Victor. It was what happened inside our family afterward. We stopped assuming that silence was the same thing as peace. We learned that trust is built through honesty, even when the truth is difficult. Robert and his wife built their marriage on that lesson. Millie became more confident about asking for help. Dana and I became better at communicating. And I finally understood that being a father doesn't mean controlling every situation. Sometimes it means standing beside your children while they face the truth themselves. Years later, Robert still keeps that wedding photograph. Sometimes when we visit, he shows it to his children and tells them about the day their parents got married. He doesn't tell the story with anger. He tells it as a story about how a difficult moment taught our family something important. One afternoon, I asked him whether he would change anything about that day. He thought for a moment and said, "I wish it had been easier, but I wouldn't change what we learned." I understood. Life rarely gives us the perfect moment we imagine. Sometimes happiness and difficulty arrive on the same day. Sometimes a celebration becomes a test. Sometimes the people who love us make mistakes while trying to protect us. And sometimes the truth arrives at the worst possible moment, only to save us from carrying a lie into the future. I still remember standing at the entrance of that wedding hall when Dana whispered, "Just pretend you know nothing." At the time, I thought she was asking me to ignore something dangerous. Now I understand she was asking me to give her time to protect our son. She made a mistake by keeping me in the dark, but her intention came from fear, not cruelty. And I made my own mistake by assuming I had to handle everything myself. The most important lesson I took from that day is simple. Family should never be afraid to tell each other the truth, because when the truth finally comes out, it is far better to face it together than to discover that everyone has been carrying a different secret alone. Robert's wedding began with a whisper, a warning, and a room full of questions. It ended with honesty, forgiveness, and a family that understood each other better than before. And whenever I think about that day, I don't remember the stranger at the back of the hall. I remember my son smiling beside the woman he loved, my daughter standing up for our family, and my wife finally telling me the truth. That is what I remember most, because sometimes the hardest day can become the day that teaches a family how to stay together. If you like this video response, us by comment, tell your places where you are looking from it. Make me happy to see people from different places. And don't forget to subscribe channel for more videos.